French laws and making them efficient. So this is a very, very difficult question, but we have to face that nobody likes minorities in the governments, because minorities are always unquiet. They're never, because they are minorities. So we had a long struggle in Germany. You know that, about how we struggled with the Danish minority we had. And I don't say we, including me, because part of my family comes from the German minority in Denmark. So, and they were very discontent with the Danish state, how they treated and so on. They were always claiming that these Danish, and the Danish minority was badly treated in Germany and so on. So they said, please don't keep the minorities, we don't like them. They should go to the country. And so this is always a problem. We have to face that. Minorities are never liked by the majority governments. And so this is one of the inherent problems. When we just yesterday had a discussion about the refugees, the German refugees that went from one part of Germany to the other part. And they said, these terrible refugees, they were our German compatriots, but they said, they're refugees, they lost their land. So it was not their fault, but they were made culpable. So you're made, at the end, you're the victims, and you're made, why did you leave? You know, this is always the problem. And we have to deal with that mentality of governments and have to see how we create a lobby. And for this essay is my strategy. You don't have to agree, but you say, it's a loss. Because you have to support them, because it's a loss to European culture. You do damage to the whole because the Circassians are so important to European general culture. It's a loss if they were not there. And this is a part of a strategy. You can agree with that or not, but it's always difficult. Whether strategy you want, if you complain too much, they say, oh, they always complain. If you don't complain, they say, oh, they're quiet, so they don't deserve to be any minority. This is always the intricate thing for every minority. And this is why we are all supporting you.
Yeah, I'll just supplement, because I agree with most of what you said. Actually, all of it. Even the beginning, even the part about the beginning. But obviously, Georgia is the obvious answer to your question at the moment. But you also have to answer why. I mean, and we all know that that was based on a war taking place in 2008. So this also shows that the cynicism of international politics, like Walter said about America, is true about both countries of the world. They look squarely at their own interests. But on the other hand, there are also other countries, like, some organizations have been lobbying Estonia, for instance, and I think there are some entry points in the other post-Soviet countries, because they face similar challenges about how to deal with historical issues, how to rewrite history in an open manner, how to discuss history and culture openly, and how to have civil society organizations involved in that type of discussions. And they are challenged. So I think there's some avenues in these post-Soviet countries that could be explored more on different levels, not only political, but also on other levels. And at the same time, there are also things that in the everyday life can seem quite invisible, but which is also important. And because one of the ways the Circassian revival or the Circassian movement or so on can work is to work on different levels, and to acknowledge that there are someone who works on other levels, and some of the actions are more visible while others are less visible, but they might be beneficial in the long run. For instance, the European organizations of the Council of Europe and the OSCE, which Russia are member of both of these organizations. And in there, the Circassian claims are entered in the annual negotiations that are taking place within Russia. So the Circassian issues are mentioned, for instance, when discussing contexts like discrimination and the rights of minorities and so on. That these are also platforms that can be. It's important that you keep feeding information to these different institutions and keep in contact with politicians who are members of these various committees or subcommittees within Council of Europe and within OSCE, because they also work. And you have a good point, because Russia has signed treaties on accepting the so-called European standards of minority protection, minority rights, anti-discrimination, and so on. So these are also state institutions that might be less visible, but that's good. It's part of the work is to address these institutions as well.
The only thing I could add to all of this is that perhaps some sort of alliance with other indigenous peoples, particularly those of the Americas who've suffered similar fates, and through a broad coalition of indigenous peoples working together creates a political voice for everyone that independently they wouldn't have. And through that way exert pressures on some governments. I know there's large numbers of American natives who are very actively right now campaigning for the United States to honor treaties they signed, which the entire Minneapolis-St. Paul region technically belongs to the Lakota tribe, for example, things like that. And so trying to make alliances with groups there, perhaps groups in Australia, and combining the voices of everyone could get some sort of political pressure that independently they wouldn't be able to have. And that's really the only thing I can add. The answers already given were very good. So.
Thank you. There was one.
First of all, I had questions to Mr. Professor Köppe, but I'm also interested in the opinion of other guest speakers. First of all, you talked already about the genocide and the recognition of the genocide. But what do you think about that Georgia recognized the Circassian genocide? You already mentioned, Mr. Professor Hansen already mentioned that, Georgia a few times, and you already mentioned Georgia a few times. Do you think that it is related to the negative relationship of Georgia and Russia, and therefore can be understood as a political answer? And finally, can Circassians trust and see the Georgians as their allies or even as their friends?
Lars has answered that question already quite well, talking about the cynicism around politics. I think I couldn't give a better answer than we have given.
Just one comment to it, basically that in the beginning it seemed a very cynical interest, but and part of it is, I mean, because it's part of politics, it's part of the geopolitics of the region, and it's part of the post-2008 war. But on the other hand, what you can see now is that there's also a shift in mentality in Georgia, which is also now moving into some kind of research institutions, for instance, and funding are given for these kind of research avenues into, for instance, Circassian issues, into other North Caucasian issues. And that has been a kind of a shift as well in the North Caucasus, in Georgia as a Caucasian country. Because when I've been many times to the North Caucasus, there's a lot of solidarity with the Ossetians, with the Abkhazians, for instance. And that has traditionally been the way that Georgia has been viewed from the North Caucasus. And they've always been disappointed at Georgia. Disappointed at why are you fighting other Caucasian people? And talking about Georgia like the little empire. I mean, like comparing them basically to Russia, that they are doing what Russia is doing to other North Caucasians. Georgia are also doing, but on a minor scale, but basically the same. And I think Georgia is now actually, in the beginning, what Georgia did was basically symbolic politics, and it was a lot about, it was about this battle of words against Russia and addressing Russia, basically. But you can see now that they are kind of shifting their interest also in a more serious manner. That they are in way, it began with propaganda type of slogans and so on, But you can see the shift now is coming, that it has actually dawned upon a lot of people, not only politicians, but especially politicians, obviously, that, okay, we should maybe be genuinely interested in multiple issues. Before we were not. So, because we were like looking at Georgian nationalism, now we're the new Georgia, we're a strong country, we're a Caucasian country. But now there is this new understanding, which has happened by accident, you can say, so, or coming in by the back door as a result of the war, that Georgia now has a real interest in the North Caucasian people. So that is also, I mean, a lot of, so there is a shift in mentality, not among everybody, not among all political parties, of course, but it's part of the picture now. That elements of the Georgia, it's not just cynical politics, there are also elements who now address from a research point of view, for instance, Circassian issues, and so there is, and some of that didn't happen before. So there is a slight change, and whether that will continue is important. It's impossible to say, but I think it is relatively genuine.
I think that the cynicism has gone from a narrow sticking it to Russians for 2008 kind of position to a broader position of long-term defense against further Russian aggression. And I think Georgia has taken the position that it's the most capable of being the leading Caucasus nation and creating some kind of a Caucasus alliance against further Russian aggression. And in that sense, a Georgian Circassian alliance would be greatly to their advantage, particularly if they could facilitate repatriation of large numbers of Circassians. So in that sense, it's still cynical, but on a much broader scale than just revenge for the war. It's in Georgia's interest to create an alliance among certain Caucasian peoples as a defense against Russia. And so in that sense, there is the foundation for a long-term common interest between Circassians and Georgians. On a more like human level, I like to draw a distinction between the Georgian government and Georgian people. And I think the Georgian people have a sincere, the ones I've met and talked to, not a lot, but sincere desire to get along with all of the other neighbors in the Caucasus, regardless of the situation. I think that political situation, the territorial situation in Georgia right now, and I think that positive efforts to increase contacts and cooperation between all Caucasus peoples will only benefit everyone.
So we'll now have our last question before lunch break. Johanna?
Yes, my question is to Dr. Köpke. He talked us about some cultural preparations to show that Circassians were present in the Caucasus during the Olympic Games. So I'm a bit worried about the Cherkess being transformed into part of the Olympic decorations because, in my opinion, it was, I'm not talking here about the other Cherkess, I'm talking only in my own name. We reacted to the decision of the Olympic Committee in 2007, already when they were in Guatemala to decide between the three candidate cities. And we immediately wrote a letter to Mr. Roger, the president of the Olympic Committee, to review their decision. And we have just 2 lines from him saying that it would be very good to organize the Olympic Games in Sochi because the Olympic Games bring contribute to the democracy, whereas it's just the opposite in the Caucasus because as soon as Sochi was decided to be the candidate city for the Olympic Games, the pressure has increased in the Caucasus, and a lot of arrestations started being done, and many ecologist organizations are also against those Olympic Games many Russians who saw their land confiscated to be given to the Olympic constructions are against that thing. So it's not just a matter of Circassian opposition to the Olympic Games. It's not just a matter of the genocide. It's a matter of equality as well. It's a matter